Let's have a conversation, Bronco Nation. What did we just witness? That has got to be the most embarrassing loss I've seen by a Boise State team since at least the loss to New Mexico. And I think this one's worse. The loss to New Mexico is kind of an offensive shootout a little bit, back and forth. Boise State ends up losing by a possession, had a chance to win it on that punt return by Cedric Wilson, gets tackled by the punter. So Boise State had some opportunities in that one. This one, 10-27. Boise State gets dominated by UTEP. Even last year's UTEP team would still have been embarrassing, but would not have been quite as embarrassing as this year's. This is not a good UTEP team. This is basically last year's UTEP team minus their top wide receivers, and a UTEP team that's already lost to New Mexico and North Texas. We just lost to a team that lost to New Mexico, and his one win prior to this was a one-possession victory against New Mexico State. That's who Boise State just lost to. I don't know what to say. I know a lot of people want heads to roll, and they specifically want Tim Plows. That's pretty obvious. But this loss doesn't come down to just one guy. This loss comes down to a lot of things. We'll talk about them in this video. We'll go through the offense, defense, special teams. We'll discuss them as much as I can stomach. We'll talk about what happened in this game. And we'll also talk about 3 keys to the game, how Boise State fulfilled or did not fulfill those. Obviously not my usual studio space. I'm traveling, as I mentioned in my previous video. I'm up here in Lynchburg. Liberty, going to be watching Liberty play tomorrow. So last week got to go to the Boise State game. This week go to Liberty. Hopefully the game tomorrow is a lot better than the game that was just happened tonight for Boise State. So why did this happen? Well, let's say one easy excuse right off the bat. And I hate to look to excuses here, but the truth is, San Diego State is next week. Obviously got a big game against San Diego State. And silence those notifications there. My phone's blowing up. All of Bronco Nation messaging me and saying that the season's doomed. San Diego State next week. UTEP is supposed to be a tune-up game. I called it a tune-up game. I don't think I was out of bounds in calling it a tune-up game. Obviously, you got to go and win every game. And if you don't win it, it's no longer a tune-up game. And that's what happened today. But this was supposed to be a tune-up game. So Boise State is looking forward to San Diego State. Maybe they're thinking in this one we can work on some things. We'll come in with a basic game plan, not reveal too much for the Aztecs next week, and we will just try and fix some issues. Obviously, run game hasn't been effective. Offensive line has had some issues. Let's try and fix some things in this game. Boise State gets behind. They don't have the game plan ready to come back and make this comeback. I think that is probably a too simple brush to paint and say that's why this loss happened. Because there's some things that you can't just call up to game plan and strategy. But part of it, I think, is Boise State overlooking. The other part, though, and there was a bunch of reports that came out at the beginning of the week that seemed to be trying to deflect attention from Tim Plow. And there might be some credibility to this discussion. There was a lot of people, they were quoting Dan Hawkins, they were quoting Tim Plow, they were quoting Andy Avalos, they were quoting a bunch of different sources dealing with this issue, talking about why does Boise State's offense look like this? This isn't the offense that Tim Plow ran at UC Davis. It's not the offense that Boise State fans are used to seeing. Why is it so, for the lack of better terms, boring? Why is it so uninspired for large parts, and then you'll get into a certain situation and have a great play? And the consensus that seemed to come from those articles was that this is what Andy Avalos wants. Now, I want to be very careful here because I haven't talked to Andy Avalos about this. I haven't sat down with him one-on-one and said, listen, give us the straight on this, give us the skinny, tell us exactly what is happening. But the consensus seemed to be that Andy Avalos, defensive mind, is trying to keep his defense fresh, focus more on a run attack, which again is not something Tim Plow is used to doing. He's having to shift gears and focus on this run attack and try and extend Boise State's drives versus the up-tempo offense that Tim Plow ran for UC Davis, and that has seen success in moments for Boise State last season and at certain points this year. That seems to be the consensus. So the shift, it's interesting. It seems they're trying to shift the blame from Tim Plow towards more of a shared concept with Andy Avalos. I'm just going to say, because I can't confirm or deny what is going on. Obviously, something is broken here with Boise State's offense. That is obvious. If that is the case, again, not confirming or denying it, because I don't know. But if that is the case, if Andy Avalos, if you are telling Tim Plow to do something that is not working, Tim Plow needs to be allowed to sink or swim based on his own merit. He needs to be able to run the offense that he thinks will be most successful. Andy Avalos is a great coach for Boise State. Andy Avalos is a great guy who's come in here and done great things with the defense, and defense was Boise State's biggest weakness. Before he came in, he's fixed that. Obviously today's game was some issues. We'll talk about that. But overall, I think everyone can agree that Boise State's defense has taken a rapid increase, a rapid step up over what it was with Harsin, at least the last couple of seasons under him. And he has inspired a lot of energy and passion and excitement in this team, despite their issues offensively. He has been able to bring in good people, and he's been able to help inspire energy and drive, and have Boise State teams that go out and beat BYU in their top 10, versus 2020 when Boise State got crushed, or go out and beat Fresno State on the road in games they shouldn't win. Boise State's been able to do those things under Andy Avalos. I still think the future is bright under Andy Avalos. But the offensive coordinator position is something that Andy Avalos should not be messing with. That is not his forte. That's not his knowledge base. He needs to bring in people that he trusts to run that position and let them go. Just whatever, if they're not working, then he makes the decision as the head coach to bring in another offensive mind to say, all right, now you've got the offense. And now as the head coach, he can see is what the offense is doing, is it being successful? But he should not be having any say over that offense, because that's not his forte. Defensive coaches, there's a reason that you don't see a lot of defensive head coaches, because in the large scheme of the college football universe, the way that the head coaching staff generally works is the head coach is over the football team and then has a heavy say in the offense as well. That's generally what you see. Well, in this case, you've got a defensive head coach who has, let's say, in the football team and a heavy hand in the defense. That's his focus. He can't be putting, you don't see guys with heavy offensive focuses putting a lot of heat into the defense. They'll be the head coach. They'll make sure things are running smoothly, but they'll let the defensive coordinators, for the larger part of it, run the defense. So, defensive head coach Andy Avalos needs to let the offense do its job. Tim Plow needs to be cut loose to run whatever he thinks is most successful for this offense. And again, I'm not saying that he's going to have success in that. I'm not saying that Tim Plow's offense I'm not saying that Tim Plow's offense coordinator for Boise State. I'm also not saying he's not. But I'm saying we need to see what Tim Plow has to bring to the table to find out. No ropes, no safety net, no shifted blame, no divided responsibility. Is Tim Plow the guy? And I know a lot of Bronco Nation is probably saying no, but based on the reports that are coming out, we don't know if we've even seen what he actually is able to bring to the table when he's given full reign. So Boise State, based on what everyone was talking about, even the announcers were seeming to kind of talk about it a little bit as well, but based on all the reports that are coming out, Tim Plow needs to be allowed to run. If this is, and maybe all those reports are wrong. Maybe this is Tim Plow's offense, in which case he needs to be gone. And I'll say that up front. I'll say that up front. I don't like to call for coaches to be fired, especially before they get to that third year, which is when I think they're most effective with having shifted into the system and brought their players in that are going to match what they want to run. But if this is 100% and the reports are just, they don't know what they're talking about, and and Dan Hawkins doesn't know what he's talking about, and so I almost said Tim Hawkins, a comedian, but Hawkins doesn't know what he's talking about, and I don't remember who was Idaho Statesman or who released it, but if they don't know what they're talking about, and this really is Tim Plow's offense, then this is not an offense that works. And after 2 years of this, and you had a whole offseason to come in and run this offense, we need a new offensive coordinator if that's the case. So Andy Avalos needs to be very, very clear, be very, very direct, and let people know who's in charge here, and let us find out is Tim Plow capable of running this offense by himself, which is what you typically want out of an offensive coordinator anyway. Let's look at his offense. What did we do today? Not much. It was an abysmal performance offensively, and it wasn't necessarily always the play calling. I mean, that was a heavy factor in it, kind of shifting back and forth between the heavy run focus and then up tempo and then back to the run focus and the slow and it was all over the field. There was no concerted effort to run something that was consistent throughout the game. But even when the play calls were pretty good, were decent, the offense couldn't perform. I mean, Boise State wasn't necessarily going out and running that single route tree that we've seen earlier this year. They had multiple wide receivers. I saw multiple wide receivers being put out in the formation to try and get guys open, between the tight ends, the running backs, the wide receivers. You had multiple options for Hank Bachmeier to go to. They were all covered. The wide receivers weren't being able to get open. The offensive line definitely wasn't blocking, and part of that was the two injured offensive linemen. But Boise State's offensive line has been terrible for 3 years. Well, they've been terrible for 4 years. So this offensive line has been terrible for a long time, so I'm not going to put the Fayetteville offensive line today just because they had two guys out. I mean, this has been an offensive line issue for a long time, but that didn't help. And then even when wide receivers were open, when there was opportunities, Hank Bachmeier was missing guys. I mean, he had some good throws today, but he also missed a ton of very, very open, 13 out of 34, only 93 yards passing. He missed a great pass to Bowens, he patted his chest, he said it was him. On that same drive, he missed a wide open Stephon Cobbs. If he just put it on him, instead of throwing it over the top of him, I mean, he could have maybe had a touchdown. The corner was behind him about 2 yards. He might have been able to come up, or 2 or 3 yards, might have been able to come up and get the tackle, but there wasn't a safety over top. I mean, Stephon Cobbs was fast enough. I mean, he could have maybe caught that, turned the corner, and it would have been at least 20 yards and a first down and maybe put Boise State into scoring position. So a lot of this game, I mean, you start shifting around who's the blame, who's the responsibility on. I don't think this comes down to one game. I think this comes down to a team that is not functioning right now. I mean, it's a team that just lost to UTEP. I mean, this is a Boise State team that is broken. And it wasn't just offense. Defense, which we'll talk about here in a second, didn't look good today either. I mean, yeah, they had some guys out as well. Noah, Banya, Cortez Hogan. But this is supposed to be a team that's very deep, especially on that front seven. They're supposed to have depth across that line. And Boise State got ran all over. I'm jumping ahead of myself here. Let's talk about this. Let's finish up grading up the offense. 177 yards of offense, 93 yards passing, 84 yards rushing. Helani looked good, 4.7 yard average per carry, 75 yards. I don't know if he got the ball enough. I think maybe he should have gotten it a little bit more, especially when Boise State was having success on those running plays. And then they get down to the red zone and they stop running the ball and throw it 3 times and kick a field goal. I mean, Boise State, maybe they should have kept doing what was working. The line was running a lot more energy today. Maybe feed him. Maybe that's what would have worked in this game, especially with Bachmeier struggling. And then you get into a point where you have to throw the ball and you don't have a choice. But earlier on, Boise State was definitely shifting back and forth between they're going to be a running team and we're going to be a team that throws it 3 times. And again, you can't be air raid and heavy run. You can be balanced attack, but that's a completely different style. That's not just alternating back and forth between run and pass. That's using both to set each other up, and that's not what was happening today. So, very disappointing performance overall by the offense. Gonna give them a D, I think, is a D plus. Is I think a fair assessment. Maybe they deserve an F. I don't hand out a lot of Fs. I think we'd have had to see some turnovers to get an F. We'll downgrade them to D minus. D minus offensive performance today against a UTEP team who is not good. This is not, UTSA of Conference USA from last year, who went and, undefeated except for one game in the regular season and then lose to San Diego State in the bowl game. But, this is not top 25 UTEP. This is terrible UTEP who lost to North Texas and New Mexico and only barely beat New Mexico State. This is abysmal. Maybe we got a glimpse of it last week when Boise State couldn't dominate against UT Martin, an FCS opponent, or against New Mexico. Maybe the signs were there. I mean, Boise State, I thought, played worse today than they did against Oregon State. So I think some parts of this is looking ahead, trying to find, looking ahead to San Diego State. I think part of it, like we kind of talked about already, is some conflicting guidance potentially coming out of Andiavalos and what they're trying to. I mean, this is not the offense they've been running all year. This looked like a little bit of a different style that they were trying to test out and it didn't work. So there's a lot of things going on here. You talk about rebuild years. I mean, this is the most rebuild year I've ever seen, where every single week Boise State looks different. And not different as in they getting better. They just look different. And each one's a different version of bad, but each is different. And it's like they're trying things as something different every single week. I've said different like 4 times now, getting caught in my own little spiral. Kind of like Boise State did today. Just the mistakes compiling. But offense, D-. We'll give them a D-, move on. Defense. This is a Boise State defense that has been really, really good. They did not look really, really good today. I mean, it wasn't that they were just on the field the whole time. They did have a lot of time on the field. But this was a defensive line that is the strength of this team that got ran all over. 186 yards rushing given up against UTEP. So 123 yards passing, 186 yards rushing, 309 yards overall. There was a couple of long plays that pulled back because of penalties, so that number could have been much worse. Boise State continued to struggle in the secondary, something I've been pointing out all season, and I don't think is a surprise to anybody, but Boise State finally faced a quarterback who was, pretty good. This guy came in with a lot of yards, but just because UTEP's not a good team doesn't mean that they didn't have playmakers. Hardson came in with almost 1,000 yards passing. So Boise State definitely gave him the same opportunities that they gave UT Martin and New Mexico, and those two teams, because they didn't have the playmakers, weren't able to capitalize. Well, they gave those opportunities to UTEP. UTEP was able to capitalize. Wide open wide receivers, and they had, 3 straight third downs that were able to be completed through the air on one drive. Boise State gave up opportunities deep, and they gave them up in crucial situations because the corners continued to struggle. They've been hurt by injuries. But it's also a corner group that was as deep, has a lot of different, they got Canio, you got Biggers. Boise State, this is a, and Mark will be getting hurt, but, you had a lot of great playmakers there in the secondary that got outplayed by UTEP. Again, I'm going to keep going back to UTEP because we didn't just get beat by Oregon State. That was embarrassing in the way that Boise State lost, but at least it was Oregon State. This is UTEP. This is Conference USA. You should never, ever, ever be in a Boise State situation, be a Mountain West team, an upper level based on what Boise State's been able to do in 20 years, and historically upper level Mountain West team, though I wouldn't necessarily, I'm not going to call them an upper level Mountain West team this year, but you should not be an upper level Mountain West team and lose to Conference USA, ever. I don't care what level of play they. That is the worst conference in college football. This was embarrassing. 309 yards offense given up overall, multiple missed tackles. Some of the ones that stand out are coming off George Charles had a couple of missed tackles, bit on a play fake by the quarterback that ended up going in for a first down. He had the quarterback dead to rights, didn't wrap up, just tried to hit off of him, ran it for first downs. But he wasn't the only one. There were missed tackles across the board that players didn't miss. Schramm who played well today, he also had a lot of missed tackles as well. So the absence of Noah, the big, not big like physically, but the linebacker for Boise State, the leader here, kind of taking up the upperclassman who's been the leader here for the linebacker core, not playing today. I think his absence hurt. Banya, player I've been really excited about, who has a lot of potential, a guy who comes hard at the ball, had a bunch of sacks last season, was second on the team in sacks. He was out. Both those guys, their losses, big impacts, and of course Cortez Hogan on the D-line. But again, this is a unit that's supposed to be deep. So this isn't a unit that you should lose a couple guys and then suddenly they can't play. That shouldn't happen. This was, again, a breakdown in coaching in this one. So they gave up 27 points. They kept Boise State in it for quite a while, forced several field goals. But in the end, 27 points, 309 yards, and they did not look like they were dominant against this team. They got ran through, especially in the second half. So I'm probably going to give them a C-, C- for the defense. So D- for the offense and C- for the defense. Did I say that right? D- offense, C- defense. All right, special teams. Really kind of a non-factor in this one. It's kind of hard to grade this because they didn't really make an impact per se. Dalmez 101 on field goal. He could have made an impact if Boise State had been able to get 6 more yards on that second to last drive before UTEP went down and put it out of reach. And maybe they could have got a field goal, and then it'd been a one-possession game, and maybe the defense would have been a little more motivated to stop them, and then they could have gone down and maybe scored and got a touchdown and pushed this into overtime, and then Boise State maybe could have won. Still would have been embarrassing, but at least it would have been an embarrassing win and not an embarrassing loss. So the lack of impact by the special teams isn't really on special teams. It's on the rest of the team not giving them an opportunity to get out there and have an impact. So Don was 1-1, 24-yard field goal. Not really noteworthy there, but also didn't miss any. So good on him. Ferguson, again, a pretty good performance here by Ferguson. He had one short punt, but overall, 44.7-yard average, long of 57. The fact that he had that one short punt, which I believe went for like 30 yards, and he still averages over 44.7 yards on 6 punts is very, very good. The punt out of the end zone that he didn't get blocked, but then gets caught by the return man and returned for a touchdown. It's not really on him. Boise State gave him the ball at the half-yard line to punt that ball away. Great job on his part, not getting it punt, not letting it go for safety. He punts it, does the best he can to get it out of there. A little bit of a line drive, maybe out-kicks his coverage a little bit, ends up getting a return for a touchdown. Again, I don't really put that on him, per se. Yeah, it's a special teams error, but that's more in the offense, putting him in that situation in the first place. Another failure on the offense's part. And as far as return game goes, Wright had a couple of nice returns. He had at least one really nice return on that punt return for that UTEP had. They had a penalty, pushed him back, and gave him some opportunity to go out. I think he got it to the 40 or 35. So overall, special teams, just going to give them a B-, move on. Biggest mistake, per se, would be that punt return for a touchdown. Again, I think it's more on the offense than anybody else. So D-, C-, B-, kind of a lot of minuses all around, and a disappointing performance overall for Boise State. My 3 keys to the game: number 1 was find a way to use all your playmakers. Yeah, Halani and Genty, we saw one play by Genty. That's it. He ran really well on that one play, got 3 yards, got tackled in the backfield, and still made 3 yards. So was able to fight through and played well. Why didn't we see him more today? Obviously, we're trying. It looked like this was a game where they were trying to spark Kalani. They were saying, we saw him kind of take over against UT Martin. Let's get him into the season here. Fine. But you can't just ignore the rest of your playmakers. Genty deserves to have a role in this offense. He didn't get that opportunity today. Boise State did a pretty good job spreading the ball around where they could. So, Hopper got his opportunity in the passing game, and he was out there on other passing routes, just covered up. Again, inability in the play calling or the players' parts, I'm not sure. But UTEP was able to cover well on defense today. So the biggest failure here on finding a way to use all your playmakers is the fact that Genty only got 1 carry. That, for me, is very disappointing. He's gotten less and less carries every single game. I don't like that trend. This is a player who needs to be in the game. It's like when Boise State had DJ Harper and Jay Ajayi, okay? DJ Harper was your senior, or 5th, or I think he was a 6th-year senior at that point. You were a 6th-year senior because he'd had those injuries and got all those special approvals. So, I think he was your 6th-year senior at that point, and he's your guy. True freshman Jay Ajayi is not going to take over for him, but there was still a role for Jay Ajayi, and I think he should have had a heavier role as well. You got a guy right here. Not that the same comparison is there, because I think that overall, Halani is a better running back than DJ Harper was, and so the power, the skill level difference between the Ajayi comparison and Harper comparison is not exactly the same. But this fact remains that you have a great, I think the future of Boise State on your bench right now. That guy needs to be getting playing time because he's earned it by what he's shown so far. So when you have a game like UTEP, who's shown some opportunities in the running game, and you only have this future star running back who has a lot of potential and a lot of ability to perform right now, only 1 carry, that's a failure in my eyes on that part. So Boise State, they tried to spread the ball around to the wide receivers, but the running backs, really a failure to use all your playmakers, a failure to get Green in the game. I'm not saying he should have taken over from Bachmeier because there really wasn't anybody to throw to. So Green, he could have used his legs effectively, yeah. But I think that also comes back to the discussion we've had before about, are we playing for next season or this season? I still don't think that Green has the capability to run this offense at the same potential level that Hank Bachmeier can, and that's probably another discussion. But there's still a role for him. There's still a way to put Green into these games that uses his legs, that gives him some playing time. Maybe not going all Montel Cozart where he's playing, like a third of the snaps, but giving him a heavy dose of involvement and being a part of this offense versus just being the backup who gets thrown in if Bachmeier struggles. These are playmakers, Genty, Green. These are playmakers on your bench. You're probably the future of your programs on your bench who have something to contribute now. Boise State needs to find a better way to use them. So I'm going to give this an F overall because I think Boise State really failed to utilize their playmakers in this one. And maybe would have spelled, maybe Green comes in, gets a big momentum play, Bachmeier comes back in, and the team's able to build off that. Or Genty spells Helani for a drive, and then Helani's able to come back and continue to attack aggressively, and that change of pace maybe messes the defense a little bit. So I'm going to give this one an F overall. Second key here, keep the play call simple and bring complexity to the routes. I think Boise State did this. I think Boise State did end up doing this key. And maybe but the wide receivers just weren't open. So Boise State actually accomplished one pretty well. And I don't know why the wide receivers weren't open. Boise State wasn't running the 2-player only option or the 1-player only option most of the game. Boise State was giving Bachmeier 4 or 5 guys to throw the ball to potentially. And it wasn't that he was missing or not seeing them. It's just that they weren't open in this one. Boise State got outplayed, and part of that was the offensive line. As soon as Hank Bachmeier scrambled, the play was over. He wasn't going to be able to throw the ball to anybody because he's apparently lost, or at least is, I'm going to say lost. I think it's still in there, but he hasn't been able to draw it out this season. Lost the ability to throw while scrambling, which was a huge part of his upside his freshman year. And it seems to be something that he has lost this season. So Boise State actually did this key pretty well. I'm going to give them an A on this key because I thought that they did keep the play calls a little more simple, and they attempted to give Hank Bachmeier more options in the route trees. They weren't trying to draw up crazy complex plays like we saw against UT Martin, where he's trying to run outside and do basically a version of the option where he's going to pretend like he's running it, and then there's a wide receiver running a go route, and so he's running to his left, and then at the last second he's going to throw the go route. That kind of like what Coastal Carolina does. So Boise State wasn't trying to do that in this game. So that's an A on their part. The failure, which I'm not going to put into this grade, but the failure comes from the fact that the offensive line didn't give them time for the wide receivers to get open, and the fact that the wide receivers weren't able to get open. And again, it's against UTEP. You should be able to get open. So that's a little bit of a head scratcher, having to go back and watch the tapes and find out exactly what happened. Maybe the play calls were too simple. Maybe there wasn't enough misdirection. Maybe there wasn't enough intricacy there to give UTEP some different looks to push their defenders away from the play. Maybe it was too predictable. But overall, Boise State actually did give Hank Bachmeier more opportunities to throw the ball and more players to throw the ball to overall, which was the focus of this key. So we'll give this one an A as well. Lastly, put together a finished product. Absolute F. If this is Boise State's finished product, they won't make a bowl this year. I don't even know if they can make a bowl right now, because right now you're sitting at 2-2. You lost to UTEP, which is supposed to be kind of one of your guaranteed wins, and you've still got to play an incredibly tough schedule. Boise State might lose their next 4 games. I think they can beat Colorado State, but you've got San Diego State, Fresno State, Air Force, Colorado State, BYU, Nevada, Wyoming, Utah State. Assuming Boise State can get a win against Colorado State, Wyoming, who beat Air Force, so that's not a guarantee, and let's say Nevada, Boise State still got to win one more game to get to bowl eligibility in that scenario. So they got to beat Utah State, returning Mountain West champions, who of course aren't playing that well this year, so maybe that's where it comes, or BYU or Air Force, Fresno State, or San Diego State. This could be a team that struggles to get to bowl eligibility the way that things are going right now, which is why I'm saying sink or swim. Let's see 100% what this team is when they are letting their decision makers, their offensive coordinator, when they're letting Tim Plow be Tim Plow. you don't have that much to play for right now this season. I mean, obviously, you haven't really gotten into the... Obviously, Boise State's 1-0 in the Mountain West right now. So you have the Mountain West Championship to play for, and you can still technically, theoretically, go out there and win that. But you can't do it the way you're playing right now. What's happening on the field is not working. Boise State needs to do something radically different. If that means cutting Tim Plow loose and letting him call exactly what he wants to call, then I think that needs to be the decision point here. Because Boise State at least needs to know what he's capable of, to find out if he's the offensive coordinator that moves beyond this rebuild year into the future for Boise State. So thanks for listening to me. If you're still here, it's a late night. I know that we're all disappointed. I hopefully got some discussion out of this, and I would love to hear your thoughts. This is a tough one. This is a tough season. It's a tough season. Boise State fans, probably one of the toughest seasons that most of us will and can remember. Boise State hasn't had a season that they're gearing up to look like this since pre-2000 eras. I mean, even when Boise State was the last year of Chris Peterson, when they went 9-4, or when they, or was it 8-5, or when last year of Dan Hawkins, when they went and lost to Boston College. I mean, even those seasons would be, Boise State fans would give anything to have those seasons over this season. I mean, that's how bad this year is. And some of the ones that stand out in the memory as bad years are now looking like good years to compare to this one. So Boise State's got to do something radically different, because what's going on what's happening right now is not working. If it's Tim Plow, then a decision point has to be made. If it's Andy Avalos, then he needs to step back and let Tim Plow, succeed or fail on his own. But something has got to change. Thanks so much for listening to me today. Make sure you like and subscribe. It's going to be a long season, but I'll keep doing these videos. Just like I watched to the very end of the game today, I'll keep doing videos and reviews all the way to the end of the season. I don't care if Boise State loses every single... Well, I do care, obviously. But even if Boise State was to lose every single game, I really hope they don't do that. I'd still be making videos right to the end, because at the end of the day, it's a short season, and just an opportunity to watch Boise State play is a blessing, and I'm going to take advantage of the blessings to watch them play, while also at the same time griping and complaining and trying to hope that Boise State pulls things out here and gets better in the future. But at the end of the day, bleed blue all the way. Hope Boise State figures some things out. And as always, go Big Blue!